Hello, and welcome to the Precision Teaching Podcast. Joining me tonight is Carrie Milico.
Hi.
And Sean Datchik.
Hi, everybody.
Doug is not joining us tonight because he's under the weather and has caught that thing that's going around.
Poor guy. We wish him all the best. Speedy recovery.
Speedy recovery, Doug. Well, let's talk about our happenings and happened. One thing that's happened, which is good news, Sean and I have recently had success in having a manuscript to a non-PT journal accepted, and in our manuscript we have the parts of the chart. We talk about acceleration measures. And what do we have AIM in there, Sean?
No, we don't. We have trend lines and acceleration values for corrects and incorrects.
Yes, and that is a very nice happened in the sense that getting our chart into being able to say, hey, look, here's why it's valuable. Here's what it gives. And for a non-PT audience to accept it, that's encouraging.
It's something that you should scream at the top of Mount Everest. It's such a huge, monumental thing. I feel like you guys are downplaying this. You guys should feel very super duper proud of it. I think that is a monumental thing that PTers have been griping about for years, about trying to get charts published in other journals. And you guys have found a way to, conduct rigorous research using the chart and using PT that is sound, that, is accepted by another journal, and that they will also accept a different form of data display that is usually presented in that journal. And I think that is well deserving of the biggest congratulations that this community can muster up. And so I think that you guys set a beautiful precedent for that, and hopefully opening up some doors for others of us to kind of follow in your footsteps.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
I would say, wait, there's more, because my colleague, Fan Yu Lin, we also received same week acceptance into a behavioral. So Sean and I, our manuscript was accepted in a special education journal, and we have another article that also has the chart, has acceleration values, which is accepted in a behavioral journal. So it's really been a banner week getting the chart in. I feel that if you can do good science and you can explain to people why the chart's valuable and talk about, here's these measures, here's how we interpret the data, that's the way to publish, and that's the way to get into other places.
Yeah, definitely. Because if some of your dependent variables or dependent measures are acceleration, then you have to include the graph that allows you to display acceleration. There's only one out there. So definitely, I think that's super cool. Are you willing to share or allowed to share what journals these are published?
The one that Rick and I co-authored would be in, I'm not sure when it's going to be published, but it was accepted for Exceptionality, a special education journal. So that's exceptionality colon, a special education journal.
A special education journal is a part of the title. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought that was a qualifier. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. And which one? The one that you and Fanyu co-author, Rick?
That one was accepted in the European Journal of Behavior Analysis.
Very cool. And they have been PT friendly in the past too, right? They've had a whole edition kind of tailored to PT.
They have, but here's one thing that people have to understand about the publishing, the whole publishing venue. Your article is before it's an article, it's a manuscript. Your manuscript gets submitted to whatever journal that you're interested in publishing in. That editor will either farm that out to an associate editor, or the editor will deal with it themselves, and either the associate editor or the editor will then select reviewers. And the reviewers are the ones who will critically read over your manuscript and decide whether it's worthy to share with the professional readership. That's true peer review. You have peers who are the consulting editors of that journal, and they're the ones who are saying, does your study meet the quality standards of whatever that the science is? So Sean, that article that's now an article, so graduates from a manuscript to an article once it's published. That all came from a very good idea that Sean had. We worked together on that, and it was conducted with very high science, and the results were positive. And it's harder for reviewers to say, oh yeah, well, we don't like the chart, therefore we're just not going to publish it. When you have good methods, good results, and a display, that's how things get in, and that's not the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
When you do science, you can have good ideas, you can run tight experiments, but it doesn't mean you're going to find something.
Very true.
So props to Sean for that idea, and it's great that we have these articles now being accepted in non-PT journals.
Hopefully we'll continue that trend.
Yes, for those of you who write like the wind.
Well, and I think one thing too is to be mentioned is that just don't shy away from submitting it. It's if you conduct your thesis, a dissertation, some other research line that is, Rick, like you were saying, quality controlled, sound science. Don't be scared to not submit it just because it has a chart. I think that's one barrier that people, it's a blocker for people when they're thinking about submitting their art or manuscripts. So I think that's step one. Let's just not assume that they're just instantly going to reject with the chart, because obviously, if you guys can do it twice in 1 week, then there's in two different journals, and there's journals out there who are willing to look at data on the standard acceleration chart. Let's just not assume that they're just going to coldly deny us just because we use the funky blue chart.
Right. That's the good point.
Thanks.
Let's move on to our email question. The email question reads as follows. I'm a doctoral student and taking a class on single case design. Can you tell me how I would use precision teaching with single case design? Also, would you be able to use it with group designs? Podcast crew, what do you think about that question?
I guess to make one distinction off the bat, I would say that I think the way that I've come to view precision teaching would probably be akin to what Rick and Kristen's book defines as precision teaching as sort of a data-based process for decision-making and assessment. And Rick can talk about those steps. And then there's another component to that, which would be metrics to measure the effect, things like acceleration, showing your data on a proportional chart, semi-log chart, and using, again, other types of metrics like trend line acceleration values, acceleration for corrects and incorrects aims. And so I think that first part of the precision teaching, where you go through the database decision-making steps, would lend themselves to any type of experimental design that you'd want to run it under single case group design. Mm-hmm. What's your thought on that, Rick?
Yeah, I agree. The precision teaching system it was built and it originated with measurement at its core. If you're doing research, single case design is a way, it's an orderly way for you to be able to understand if you have an effect. So you have dependent variables, independent variables. Dependent variables, the thing that you're measuring, and the independent variable is your intervention to see if it's impacting the dependent variable. So the chart could easily be placed in there. And I see precision teaching as the science of measurement. And as such, it could certainly be used there with the single case design.
And I think, Sean, to go to what you were saying in referencing Rick and Kirsten's book is that, and now I don't have these values memorized, but they specify particular ranges for accelerations, acceleration values and bounce values to indicate the kind of qualitative wording that other behavior analytic individuals will use. So it's, steady state behavior. So if you're, end of a particular phase or baseline, if the trend is decreasing, well, what does it decreasing mean and by how much? Is it rapidly decreasing or is it slowly decreasing? And the PT book gives you actual quantitative values of the qualifiers that, that we use to describe the data. So that way you can integrate actual numbers into your proposal saying that, if baseline, if you have to look at for, particular steady state behavior, then the bounce won't exceed a times, times 2.5 value, something like that. But you can use the book, the PT book, to refer to actual values instead of just using a very vague description of the data.
I think what you just said is something everyone conducting research can take home, especially graduate students. Mm-hmm. You want to make a discovery. You want to do better science. Well, guess what? If you are stuck with a non-standard linear chart, good luck with that. And I don't mean that to be flip. Every time you create your own chart, what specifications are you making it to? Sure, there are some general rules out there which you may or may not be aware of, but what is significant? How do you know how significant your data is? What we have to offer the whole world, and this is why I know it's just a matter of time before more and more people gravitate towards the chart and the things that we have in precision teaching, because we can quantify that information. And when you can quantify things, great discoveries are made. And as you were saying, Carrie, we could move our science to saying, all right, what is acceptable stability? Have you ever read a journal article where people have quantified what stability is?
Not in our field.
Yeah, not in our field. But think about how crazy that is, that we have this tool where we can actually say, okay, stability is times 2, times 3, whatever that value is. We have that at our fingertips for everybody that does single case design. We have that. And when you think about how many people are not using that and what they're preferring to do is to just, every person gets to change it. It's almost madness when you think about a science saying, oh yeah, everybody just do whatever the hell you want. The more I understand the power of the chart, the more these things drive me crazy, because we could do so much better. And when I say we, I mean everybody that's interested in looking at behavior, quantifying it, seeing it in a standard fashion. That's what we have to offer, and that's something that really excites me.
Well, and to extend on that point and talk about the standard, and let's take the variability as an example, and we use the term bounce in precision teaching, but behavior analysis talks about variability. If you have let's say you open up Java, and so the first article is talking about variability, and they're like, oh, the data were highly variable, right? You turn to the next article and they may say highly variable, but I bet that they're like, are they the same level of highly variable? Is one a little bit more variable than the other? So with those, just kind of subjective kind of descriptors, you're not really able to differentiate between, in this example, the variability in those two data sets. But yet, if you can actually assign a specific number to that variability, then you can, make comparisons and look at data across charts and say like, oh, well, that data set is more variable because that's a times 3.7 bounce, and where over here it's only a 2.5. And so that way you can just make more concrete comparisons, and you can do the same thing with acceleration. Okay, both the trends are increasing. Awesome. Oh, they're both rapidly increasing. Great. But one is doing it more than the other. So is it more rapidly increasing? Mm-hmm. Like, how many more qualifiers of words can you smack onto that description? So with acceleration value, it allows you to objectively talk about the data.
I guess I share y'all's general enthusiasm for some of the PT metrics, but I guess my comments are probably going to be Debbie Downer, but they just need to temper it a little bit. Is that I think that some of the metrics can be useful, but I mean, studies that have not used the metrics or have not used data display, science still has moved forward. I feel like, I mean, just Rick has obviously more knowledge about intervention research than I do, but just from my readings of it, the field has moved forward. We have improved outcomes for kids or people. So it's still, I think, regardless, to go back to the original question, regardless of whatever design you decide best answers your experimental question, I think that there are different tools that probably PT can offer to maybe give you a different analytic tool on it.
Mm-hmm. And I completely agree with you, Sean, that, we have made advances and discoveries in our field in both in the world of behavior analysis and education. But I would also say that, because we always talk about there's some practicum sites that they don't graph their data until like a week after the behavior occurred. And they're still making a change in the kid's life. There's no doubt about it. That kid is still improving. But what could happen, let's say, if they graph their data immediately after the behavior, or even, let's say, after the session, if you wanted to bring in any sort of delay. So, could you make some database decisions more quickly, right, if you observe the data in that time as opposed to a week later? So even though there's discoveries being made, could these discoveries, one, be made more recently or earlier than what they were made? Could they be better discoveries? Could they be more powerful discoveries? Could we already been advancing the field and looking at just new measurements and new ways of graphing data as opposed to being stuck in this one little rut? So I agree that, it is moving forward, but could it be moving forward at a greater pace than what we're experiencing now? And could we be in a position where we'd be finding greater outcomes if we were being a little bit more objective with our analyses? That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah. We could spend a big portion of this segment talking about this, but Sean and Carrie, you both have some good comments there. So I'm going to move us on. Thank you, Julie, for that question. And I'd like to talk about our first news story, which is education news. And this is a story that talks about how states are starting to test teachers. And the story's interesting because there's a lot of when we look at this is something that all of us have to address. We all have a stake in education, in that kids are our future. If we want a society to thrive, how educated our children are and how they grow up into adults and the skills that they have directly affects society and where it's going. Whose job is it to teach those students? It's the teachers. And right now in the United States, we look at how much money we spend, and we see that our output in terms of overall test scores is not as good as we would like it. And that's perhaps an understatement. And this article talked about how now states are starting to test teachers and the impact that that's having. For example, it talked about how some tenure decisions are informed by, is the teacher good? And when I was reading this article, of course, I'm thinking through the lens of precision teaching and thinking how even that would inform the different metrics that you're using with the teachers. But I thought this article was encouraging.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. I think that just like any profession, individuals should be held accountable for what they do. And, with our instructors in our learning center, they have audits so that, their behavior is still being measured. But my concern is, are we putting all of our eggs in one basket based on the teacher's performance? The outcome is just being on a standardized test. Mm-hmm. So we all know about the issues with just, one test a year, looking at performance based on that. So I think it would be another step to continue these steps in a good direction would be to maybe embrace more frequent testing, such as CBMs, where, the curriculum-based measures where they, take a, 1 to 4 minute test on a particular subject area, if it's reading a passage or, solving math problems, where it's given every week. And so that there's progress monitoring, and it allows for some of that variability if the kid was sick or if, they didn't get a good night's sleep the night before the test or whatever it is that can kind of throw off some scores with those standardized tests. But then also looking at the teacher's performance, because there's some variables that they can't control that could be affecting the student's performance. So not putting all of our eggs into the basket of this, like how the kids perform, but let's look at what the teacher actually has control over. So how many practice opportunities are they providing in the classroom? Are they, how are they engaging with the students and actually having some sort of countable objective measures that we're looking at teacher behavior and not just relying on student behavior. So like for our instructors at our learning center, we have this very extensive checklist of what the instructors are supposed to be doing before, during, and after the session. They're charting their error correction procedures, any behavior plans, coaching during the timing, when are they actually starting the timer at the right time? Are they, all these little behaviors that we are able to track in the session and actually provide with a frequency aim of proficient instructor behaviors. So, so approximately is engaging in one timing per minute. So that means you have to keep the student on task. So all those things. So looking more at what the teacher has control over as opposed to just relying on student performance, I think would be a next, I don't want to say better step, but I like that step more than just relying on test scores for students, because then the teacher kind of has control over their behavior.
I definitely agree with the overall sentiment that looking at looking at scores on assessment could help determine or help school districts or principals or superintendents identify strong teachers and then identify teachers who need help. And it could potentially lead to some really outstanding outcomes for kids. I think where sort of the rubber meets the road is for what Carrie is talking about in terms of some of how the implementation goes around pulling out that type of analysis from a year-end test without such things as a pre-test or maybe more frequent assessment, and what those different. So that's one issue. Then the second issue would be what is acceptable performance. So what I mean by that is if a student scores, let's say if you use sort of a scale system of a student can score unsatisfactory or approaching basic, and then mastery or advanced. Well, what's an acceptable measure for a student at the end of the year? Is it basic? Is it approaching basic? And so that's one thing. And then also another thing would be is how do we reward teachers? What does reward mean? Is it where teachers are identified and they're sort of helped along, or is it just simply as a matter of we find teachers and then we sort of reward them financially? So I think that there's some different things that hopefully these different states that the article references, I think they said 23 states. So hopefully these are some things that the states are pulling out lessons learned from.
Like what you're suggesting, what qualitative level should they be at? If we were using sensitive measure and you wanted to put me into that system, I would take the lowest of the low if this were based on merit, or measuring how well I do was based on relative performance change. So you give me someone who's very low in a particular skill, and if we measure what percent gain do they make, for example, using acceleration, then you could really push those students fast because they're so far behind. I suppose where it becomes a little more challenging is depending on the system. If you have someone who needs to get to 150 and they're at 130, they don't have a very far place to go. Mm-hmm. Still, the just putting these down to a blunt instrument such as a standard test, it's a step in the right direction. I'm glad we're looking at this, but I would hope for teachers' sake we could use something that has much more sensitivity, which would be everything that we talk about in our field of precision teaching. I'm hopeful that that's where this is leading to.
Yeah, and I want to jump on that comment, Rick, that you said, so taking what we know in precision teaching, and one of our most sensitive measures is acceleration. And so, like, I have a teacher friend in Reno, and he was telling me how it doesn't, the way the system was set up. Now, we had this conversation, I want to say like 3 years ago. So knowing the system, it probably changed. Well, I don't know, who knows? But so let's say, not talking about test scores, but like grade level. So if he's teaching sixth grade and he has a kid that comes in who's actually at like a third grade math level instead of sixth grade, let's say that kid worked his little tail off, and now he's performing at a beginning sixth grade level as opposed to at the end of sixth grade level. But he kind of surpassed, he advanced 3 grade levels that year, right? So if we're looking at it on a chart, there would be a nice steep acceleration there because there's a lot of learning going on very quickly. But because that kid is still not at grade level, the teacher is not rewarded or acknowledged in any way that, wow, look, this kid just advanced by 3 grade levels. It's, this kid is not performing at grade level, so you're kind of screwed. So if we have a measure like acceleration that is used somehow in this whole analysis of teacher behavior and then student performance, really we're not looking at teacher behavior, but student performance, then we, then the teacher can actually receive some, reward in some way for that huge acceleration that kid did, even though they're not performing yet at grade level, but acknowledging all the work that has gone on throughout that year.
This article was in The Economist and is written from Chicago. And what you just said, if we can share this with people in big cities like Chicago, New York, and start showing very plain fashion how valuable these measures are, that's a way to help advance the science of measurement. That's a nice story and good comments. All right, let's move on to science news. We have an article that is about the rise of the infographic. I thought that this would be interesting to talk about because all of us right now, we use what would be called a statistical graphic. A statistical graphic would be something like the chart or just a bar chart, a pie chart, a scatter plot. They are charts or graphs that present statistical analysis visually. But now we have this new class of graphics, which are you probably see them all the time because they're becoming very persuasive, and they're called the infographics. And as said, the infographics are meant to blend information in graphics so they can reach the person reading it and affect them in a way that might be similar to a statistical graphic, but you're not necessarily presenting statistics as we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I like this. And I think that the rise, I totally think is Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Is because of Facebook. So, you have those friends who are like, me, who like show baby pictures all the time. And you have friends who show like political stuff. And you have friends like, I have some friends because I love the whole natural birth thing. So they're showing some, infographics on, what happens when your labor is induced with chemicals and stuff like that, right? So I really think it's Facebook because it's a quick and easy way to get whatever point it is across, and it lures the viewer into it because you see this picture like on this like on this article itself. If you flip through and you see the ones with they're like animals that are in groups, and you're like, oh, that's just an interesting image. Let me click on that and see what it's talking about. And in 5 seconds, you see what's going on, and so it's appealing, it's attractive. And I really think that precision teaching, somebody in our field needs to create an infographic for precision teaching, and it can have like talking about acceleration and talking about like results of some like really awesome studies that support some pillars, some
Mm-hmm.
Big things that we do in our field. So like, hey, you just need to work on a skill for 1 minute or 15 seconds and you still get fluency. What is fluency? And then can have an infographic on that stuff. So I don't know, I think that would be a really cool marketing tool for us.
The infographic does blend information and graphics, and it makes pretty meaningful impact. The one that struck me was the infographic on New York's carbon emissions.
Oh, yeah, that was a cool one.
Yeah. So if you go to the news story and read it, what they do is you see the city. It's an aerial view, and they have these blocks, these teal-colored blocks, and each block is representing, maybe they don't say it, But what they do is they show you if you have 54 million tons of carbon dioxide, they just pile them all together and you see it all throughout the city. And you're like, wow, this is 1 year. And then when you start thinking about it, that all of that represents carbon dioxide and that's just 1 year, then you start saying, okay, well, if they did that for 10 years and then we have all of these other cities that are doing the same thing, where the hell is all this carbon dioxide going? I mean, it just like, it strikes you deeply. You're like, holy crap, it just makes it so real. And if we could, do something like that, it would be great. But certainly all the different information that they have here they also have one on mass extinction, and they show species that are dying. I mean, that stuff really makes you take pause, because we are all connected. And, if we overfish things and we have all these, where are people going to get food?
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Actually, this is a side comment, but Ethan just told me that my husband told me that there's like some deadly, I don't know if it's a virus or something that's going across banana trees. That bananas actually might be extinct because it's now coming into South America, where there's like the biggest banana farm where really we get 98% of our grocery store bananas. So that was just a little side comment there.
I would not be happy if that happens.
No. So no to all listeners, go out and buy yourself a banana tree.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the infographics are super cool. And I feel for like me personally, I think that I retain the statistic or the particular information that they're trying to relate to me. So like if it's on this mass extinction, the 13% or 25% that they're trying to make a point about, I'll remember that number more so than I will if I read it in an article, because I see it as a picture.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of infographics, and that's the beauty of why we love graphics, period. When you can visualize something, we're a species where looking for patterns, we're evolved for that. I mean, that's just part of how we are humans, and it's very striking to see these graphics, and when they are terse and they make a point, then that information sticks with you. And that's the idea right there. So read up on this story because it's interesting. Well, with that, I would like to move on to our interview. Today, we have an interview with a very famous author. His name is Mark Tufo, and Mark writes in a subclass of or a subgenre of horror, which is zombie fiction. And Mark Tufo is one of the just an incredible author. And we, in the Precision Teaching Podcast, like to continue to expand our scope of interviews to people not just in our particular field, but also talking to people who use all the tools that we are working on in education, such as writing, critically reading, being creative. And it's very nice to hear and listen to people that might not particularly be in our field, but yet these are the things that they do, and this is how they make a living. So with that, let's go to the interview.
Today, I would like to welcome Mark Tufo to the Precision Teaching Podcast. Mark is a very successful author. He has written the Zombie Fallout series. He's written a number of series around these characters, such as Timothy, the Indian Hill series, the Book of Riley, and a lot of others. Mark has been a writer for some time, and before he was a writer, Mark worked in the corporate world, and before that, he also was in Marines and did many other wonderful things. Mark, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Rick. I really appreciate you having me on.
Tell us, how did you become a writer?
It was kind of on accident. It was actually a dare by my wife. I had been laid off from corporate America, and I was driving her nuts. I couldn't sleep. I was stressed out. I was reading tons, and one day after a marathon reading session, I came downstairs and I told my wife, I was like, it was a pretty good book, but I think I could do better. She basically said, then why don't you? And honestly, I think it was just so I would stop bugging her, go write a book. He'd lock himself away in his office, and that's what I did. That was the first zombie Fallout book. I just wrote it as almost kind of as a stress relief.
Now, that came out, a few years ago?
I want to say 2009, yeah.
2009. So within 2009, you have been exceptionally prolific. You've written a number of other books, and you have all of these. Let me say this. What is a day in the life of you being a writer?
I'm not an early bird by any stretch. I like to get up around 9:30, get my coffee, I'm good to go about 10, and then I generally write anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 words a day, and then I'm constantly going back and doing revisions over whether it's the book I'm working on at that moment or previous books which we have since had re-edited. And then after that, it's a couple hours of correspondence, whether through email or Facebook, and by then, it's usually somewhere in the 6 to 7 o'clock range, and by that time I'm kind of brain fried. So that's about a typical day.
So
7
you
days
have
a week. Yeah.
7 days a week?
Yeah, I can't stop. I get bad OCD. It drives my wife crazy.
Is your cycle then that you have a time where you're generating content and then you do revisions, or is it generate, revise?
It's generally generate and then revise, because I find that revision takes so much out of me. I start, frying the brain cells, and I can't think straight after doing revisions, whereas I like to be as creative as possible when I'm generating.
One of the things that I do when I write is, let me step back. To become a better writer, one of the things that I do is I read a lot. And when I'm reading, if I find a nice adverb-noun combo, or there's a nice sentence structure, or there's a clever turn of phrase, I copy that and I put it in my writer's notebook. And then later, I'll try to use that as a model to help improve my writing. Do you have any strategies that you use to improve your writing?
I'm also of the ilk that reading a lot is definitely the key to successful writing. Unfortunately, since I have started writing, my reading has taken a serious curtail, and I think that has to do with I spend so much time, rereading or doing revisions on my own material that just by the time I'm ready to unwind for the night, it's almost kind of like the last thing I want to do is pick up another book, but I try. Yeah, and I do that same kind of thing with almost every aspect in life in regards to improving my work. I take a lot of my editor's notes and really try to incorporate those so that he won't see the same mistakes over and over and over again. But yeah, definitely when I read any writer and I see how they're honing their craft, I try to, take bits and pieces of all different ones to emulate, for sure. Anything to improve my craft.
Now, how does the editing process work?
In what aspect?
Are you given, so you write content, and then how closely, how much contact do you have with your editor? After a month's work, you give the editor something, or do you have to do, a whole draft of a book to give to the editor?
The way I work, I do a whole draft, then I'll go through it one time, doing all the first sets of rewrites, and then I give it to my editor. And this particular editor, great guy, does fantastic work, but he is all grammar and punctuation, which I need. That's definitely not my forte. But what he doesn't do is continuity to make sure that if I get a person named John, that they stay John throughout the series and don't become Jack or things like that. So I send it off to an editor. I get it back from him, and then I do another set of rewrites off of what he does, and then it goes to I've got two what I call beta readers, but they're really so much more. They're the ones that do continuity checks and timeline issues and things like that, and actually give helpful responses to like, hey, this doesn't make sense, or this plot line, we're not sure where you're going. So, then I'll get it back from them, and then it's a whole another set of rewrites. So I've told numerous people writing the book, that's the easiest part. It's all the after work that's very time consuming and can be tedious.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned earlier that you do a lot of reading, what are some of the things that you like to read?
When I was a kid, it was science fiction. I couldn't get enough. I still like to read science fiction at some points. It's funny, I write horror, but I don't read too much of it. I mostly read suspense. I'm more in the pulp fiction. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't get to too many of the classics like I used to. James Rollins, folks like that, I just love.
Zombie fiction seems to be at an all-time high. This past summer, I was visiting a friend, and I was in McDonald's, and I saw this teenager with this really cool shirt on. It had a picture of Daryl from the Walking Dead TV series.
Sure.
And underneath there was a caption that said, "If Daryl dies, we all riot." And I thought, wow, this is someone that loves the genre. And I see that very often with middle schoolers and high schoolers. Why do you think there's such an attraction to zombies at this point in time? And maybe it's not this point in time. Even when I was growing up in the 80s, there were zombies. So it just seems to be very popular now.
Yeah, it's like anything. It's got an ebb and flow, from the 60s when George Romero came out with his vision. It's kind of peaked and valleyed for sure. I mean, it's definitely an all-time high with The Walking Dead. The fascination, I don't know. I can tell you that it's a loyal crowd, and it's a small, but I think loyal crowd, kind of a subgenre of horror. I just think they like the aspect of that change that zombies would bring in, the change from the mundane and the ordinary. Although, I mean, I'm not of that ilk. I don't want to be the one that's running around trying to survive for my life, not being able to get a hot shower and a hot meal every day. So I don't want to be included in there. But I think that's part of it. I really think it is the escape from reality.
I went to Goodreads and also Audible and looked at the ratings that people were giving you, and in both of those, they are almost so many 5-star ratings and 4-star ratings, and clearly people enjoy your work. How do you get your ideas for your stories and your characters?
It's very organic. It's the very first chapter of Zombie Fallout 1 was just something I played with as I went to bed each night. When I was laying my head down the pillow, I kind of played out, like, what would I do if a zombie apocalypse started? How would it start? What would happen? And then I just kind of wrote down that first chapter, and, I mean, everything grew organically from there. Tommy and Eliza, two big characters from the series, were never part of the original design. They kind of wrote themselves in. I've had folks ask, do you storyboard, and do you know how the book's going to end? And honestly, when something happens in the book, it's almost as big a surprise to me as it is to the reader, because I had no idea that's how it was going to end up.
You have a very loyal following, which I can tell. Do you? And one thing that's also very refreshing about you is you're very well connected with your audience. For example, you have a Facebook page. You you post on that Facebook page, you interact with your readers, and that seems to be very different from how other writers are very inaccessible, and maybe there's a Facebook page or something and people can like it, but they're not interacting. Is that just something that you came to do?
Like when the first person responded to me, I think I fell out of my seat. Like, oh my God, somebody responded to me. I'm honored. I'm flabbergasted. I can't believe this. And I responded back. I'm originally a blue collar guy. I've been taught how blue collar values. Someone reaches out to you, you reach back. That's just how I've always been. I'm not. I mean, it has, as the readership has grown, it's definitely taken on a life of its own. It's part of my, I don't want to say it's part of my job, because I still value every time somebody reaches out, and I still love communicating with folks. And was it a conscious decision at first? I don't think so, but I'm not going to lie. I believe it helps. Folks like to be able to ask a question. Why did this happen, or why did that go with that person? And I love talking to them. I love answering them.
Has any of your interactions or feedback from fans influenced your writing?
Oh, without a doubt. Sure, I've had folks suggest certain scenes, or this person should go out this way, or and I'll take some of those things into account, and I always try to give them kudos where it's due to. I'll put them in an acknowledgement if I've taken an idea. And I've even had some feedback with folks that have told me there's a timeline issue, and I've gone back and done revisions to fix things. So I'm always thankful for suggestions or corrections.
It makes me think of I don't know if you ever saw that if you ever watched Galaxy Quest. But,
oh yeah, loved it.
Yeah, so there's that one scene where the people are there with the fans, and they're asking these really technical questions, and
yeah, and they have no clue.
Exactly. And I always think that if you're a big time writer like yourself, that's bound to happen often. That people just love your work so much that they're like, hey, how did this happen when this was supposed to be happening?
It's happened a few times. Folks that have read the material more than I have, a viral infection can't do this because it has to do this. And I'm like, I honestly don't have a clue. If you say so, you're probably right, But it does happen. I've even had folks, it's kind of funny, we'll throw out a quote, and I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good line. Who wrote that? And they'll be like, you did. I was like, oh, okay.
With that, with all of your body of work, I'm sure that's easy to forget some of the things that you said.
Yeah, it does happen for sure.
We live in a culture where we have people that object to certain genres, for example, fantasy. If you remember when Harry Potter came out, that was extremely successful, but yet there were people that were strenuously objecting to children reading books about wizards and magic. Now, as you said, zombie fiction is a subgenre of horror. Have you experienced any type of reactions like that to your work?
I've honestly got to say, out of every 100 people that contact me, we can even go 1,000. I mean, 999 are in the positive. Every once in a while you get somebody that's got an objection to something, and it goes back to the adage, you can't please everyone. And I would honestly think I was doing something wrong if I did. If you're getting a kid to read, I think it's already a victory.
Uh-huh.
I mean, some of my content, I've had some folks say that, they're reading it to their, 7-year-old grandkid, and I'm not advising that. But, 14, 15, I'm not saying anything in my books that they're not 10 times more versed in.
Mm-hmm. If people, for example, The Walking Dead, I don't know if you had a chance to read the graphic novel. That is a very graphic novel in every sense of the word. I mean, the storytelling is intense. It's dark. I think in the zombie fiction genre, the best writing is what captures that apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic, what happens. And certainly your books do a very, very fine job of capturing that spirit. So people reading that should expect that, this is the content that you're going to get.
Well, I mean, by its nature, it has to be dark, and I'm a firm believer, I hate to be down on man, but I think in dark times, people revert to who's number one and solve, and that shows in the books as well. I do try to interject a lot of humor into it so that, on one page you're like biting your fingernails in concern, and the next you kind of hopefully laughing, and then I feel like I've alleviated some of the tension. But the Timothy series is very dark and very graphic as far as my books go, and much more so than the Zombie Fallout series.
What is the main goal of being an effective, or just being a storyteller? What do you see as the goal?
I'm happiest when people tell me I was literally crying at this passage, or I was laughing out loud. I had tears. I was on the bus listening on my Kindle Fire, and I was just laughing so hard I couldn't stop. When folks tell me I can evoke those types of feelings, I feel that as a storyteller, I've done something right. Or when the whole family, like mom and dad and the kids, have a listening hour or a reading hour, and it's my stories, and it brings the family together like that, and they're all enjoying it. That to me is the victory.
Amen. Many people may have that fantasy of becoming a successful author. People probably even fantasize of being the next Stephen King or Mary Higgins Clark. What does it take, though, to be a full-time author in the business, making your living from your writing?
It is not easy. I get a lot of folks that think that truly think it's a get-rich-quick scheme, and for a small portion, maybe it is. I've seen some guys blaze onto the scene and stuff just take off, but the first 7 months we had books available. I sold 3. And it was one of them was ours. We were trying to make sure that the links worked. So in reality, I sold 2 books in 7 months. It is work. It is a lot of work. When I worked at corporate America, I did my 40 hours and I went home. When I do this, 80 to 100 hour work week, that's about the normal. I'm constantly, whether it's the correspondence or the book or the revisions, the edits, the marketing, all of it. It's and even now, my wife, she is taking a fair portion, and she does the marketing and those types of things to try to get a few of the things off my plate. It's like anything. If you want to be successful, you got to work hard at it. It's not just a matter of plopping a few pages together and putting it out on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. We have a new landscape for print media. You started writing maybe seriously writing in, 07, 08?
Yeah, that's probably fair to say.
So at that point in time, and as we keep moving forward, the print media certainly has undergone changes. So how has that affected you?
Well, I'd never be where I was if it hadn't. I've got a stack of rejection letters, probably a ream high if I put them all together. We tried every publishing house and agent on this side of the continental divide to try to get the books published, and nobody bit. Nobody wanted anything to do with them. And so the first one was like, let's just self-pub. We'll just put one up, see what happens. And in all reality, it was just cool to say I have a book available, because it sure as heck wasn't buying coffee or anything. We weren't making enough royalties to do anything. But if it wasn't for the Kindles and the Nooks of the world and the electronic books, I'm sure I'd still be in an HR department somewhere.
You have a lot of your books on Audible, and Sean Rennett is the reader. How did that process work for you?
That was pretty cool. I had it was this company called Tantor. They're an audio company, sorry. And they had approached me, and they wanted the audio rights. And it's funny, Rick, because I was like, audio? Who listens to audiobooks? Does anybody do that anymore? And so I was like, you want the rights? Sure, here they are. And, and I had no idea. Just a quick example of numbers. In the first, I'll say, I don't know, three years I had Zombie Fallout. I had, in ebook format, I had, say, 350 reviews. In the first 6 months I had Zombie Fallout in audio, I had close to 1,000. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was a staggering amount as far as I was concerned, and I just had no idea that it was as big a business as it was. And it was Tantor that picked out Sean Rennett, and I couldn't be any happier. I mean, people love him as much as the books. They can't picture anybody else but him being the narrator at this point.
If he's narrated all of your work, well, at least the works that I've seen on Audible.
He's actually done everything. My Book of Riley series is actually a zombie book through the eyes of a female American bulldog. And Tantor came back to me, and they're like, do you want Sean to do these? Do you want us to get a female to do the books? And I was like, it's not broke. Don't fix it. So he even did those. And they were fantastic.
You mentioned that there's a lot of marketing that has to go on. Is all the marketing done by you? Do you hire people? How does that process work?
It's actually all done by my wife, and I'd be honest, at this point, she's so far into it. I honestly don't know all the ins and outs that she's plugged into. There are blog tours. There's ENT, which is electronic news. You can advertise with them. We do blog tours from time to time. Those to generate interest. Even Facebook has ads. I know we've done a few of those. It's getting the name out is really what it's all about. It's just because you were talking about how print media has changed. Well, they were realizing how big of an effect indie authors were having on them. So now that, indies, the big six, even their electronic books, were the same price as their hard books. So a lot of people were getting mad. It's like, why do I have to spend $10 on an electronic book? You didn't have to ship it. There's no paper involved, no ink. It should be a discount, and it wasn't. So there they are. Now they can get an indie book for, we'll say anywhere from $1.99 to $3.99 or so, or I can pay $12 for a Rollins or a Stephen King book. Well, that's when the indies were. That was when it was big. That was all through 2012, and then right towards the end of the year, the big six finally got it in their noodle that maybe we should drop these prices, and that's where the indies took a hit, because if you have $10 on your Amazon gift card, are you going to spend it? You can spend $4.99 on a Stephen King or $4.99 on a Mark Tufo. Who's Mark Tufo? So, now there's a change that we have to adapt to.
With your writing schedule, it sounds very intense, and I'm very respectful of that work ethic. I feel the writing that I do is a little bit different. I'm in the academic world, but nevertheless, it's the same principles applied. If you want to put out prolific content, you have to just sit down, do the work, and pump it out. When you have that workload, certainly it's very taxing. Do you see yourself continuing writing? What's next for you? Are you going to continue with the series? Do you see yourself branching out into other genres?
I think just longevity, I've got to branch out. With that being said, I mean, I'm working on actually Zombie Fallout 7, hopefully coming out next month. But I do have a couple books. One is actually paranormal, and the other one would be traditional horror. And I actually got a sci-fi series, The Indian Hill. So I'd like to, I'm trying to dip as many irons into the fire as I can. There's always going to be the ebb and flow. So once the zombies have maybe cooled off, I've got another set of books. But yeah, I'm hoping to keep writing as long as I can. I wasn't, I didn't do this kind of regiment when I was working. It was impossible. When I first started writing, it was a little bit at nights, and mostly during the weekends is when I would do it. But now that I'm doing it full time, and this is how we're surviving, and we live and eat, it's been taken on a much bigger animal now.
I wonder if someone will be knocking on your door or actually filling up your email asking you about television rights, because with the success of The Walking Dead, I imagine that people are looking for good stories in terms of the zombies.
I've got there's a development company. It's called Illuminante that actually has the rights right now. But what I've learned, because I'm pretty much a newbie, is development is light years away from production. So I know they're working on a script and something they want to pitch, and they get a couple companies that are interested. Whether it becomes a series or a movie, that's yet to be determined.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have to pick me up off the floor if I got the news that it was going into production. That's for sure.
How can people best find you if they would like to buy your work?
Any electronic device, or you can just go to Amazon.com and put in Mark Tufo, Tufo, or you come to my website, marktufo.com, or I'm on Facebook, Twitter. If you're looking for me, I'm pretty easy to find. So if I owe you any money, then I probably don't come looking for me.
I'll make sure that I put a few of those in our show notes. Well, we're approaching the end of our interview. Is there anything I could have asked you that I should have asked you, or anything that you wanted to say before we leave?
No, I think you nailed it all. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience.
You're a humble person, and we salute storytellers and people that encourage others to read, and it's a very noble profession. So thank you, Mark, for taking time to visit us and talk with us at the Precision Teaching Podcast.
Thank you.
Well, as usual, we had another fabulous interview. Mark Tufo, we can't thank you enough for spending your time and talking with us. And that brings us towards the end of the show. Sean and Carrie, did we forget to talk about anything tonight?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Feel better, Doug.
Yes. Well, with that, on behalf of Carrie Milico and Sean Datchick, I'm Rick Cabina. Thank you for joining the Precision Teaching Podcast.